Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Overtime Podcast, a Cold Front Report multicast. I'm one of your two co-hosts, Clayton Garrett. You can find me on Twitter at CFRCLAYTON, and joining me as always.
I'm Jeff Uvino. You can find me on Twitter at RealJUVEINO.
Apologies to our loyal watchers and listeners. Friday is a little different, but some unprecedented circumstances had occurred, so we had to adapt, adjust, and overcome. But the Bills having that Monday night victory that they did this past week over the 49ers, 34-24. Jeff, what were your thoughts after that performance by the Bills?
Well, that game was the most impressive performance in the national spotlight that we've seen from the Bills in a long time. They broke a 6-game losing streak on Monday Night Football, and Josh Allen had one of the best games of his career. That's evident in the fact that he won AFC Offensive Player of the Week this week, the third time in the season he has won the award. And if me saying that doesn't carry any weight, for reference, Patrick Mahomes has won AFC Offensive Player of the Week twice this year, and no other player has won it more than once. So that was impressive stuff from Allen, and really just a complete game by the Bills. I thought their defense had another great game. Make that back-to-back performances that were really solid between the 49ers game and the Chargers game. I mean, the Bills defense was in this game and in the week before, it looked like it did in 2019, and that's very encouraging for this team going forward. So really just an all-around great performance. Not a lot we can complain about from this one.
Yeah, no, I thought, hands down, this was the most complete performance this football team has on record. More complete than the Chargers game, more than complete than any performance that they had this year, really, because in all phases, this team was really getting the job done. Defensively, they were making plays when they had to. I understand the Niners had a quick little drive there in the third quarter where you don't really like to see that. I don't want to see that. But the point being, the Bills' defense made plays when they had to. Those goal line stands when the 49ers drove 99 yards down the field to be stopped on 4th and goal, that was huge. The defense really showed up big in this game. I felt like obviously there were points and times where they weren't playing great, but I felt like I didn't really feel like this game was out of the Bills' control at all. The Bills' defense, they were making plays. They created turnovers in the second half, another interception for Tre'Davious White. Overall, just talking about the defense, I thought they did a really good job. I mean, granted, they were playing Nick Mullins, but they did what they needed to do in this game. They did what I expected them to do against a backup quarterback.
Yeah, if you take away the touchdown drive where the Niners started at the Buffalo 5-yard line, and you take away the touchdown drive in garbage time at the end of the game, you're looking at 10 points allowed. And I think this performance by the Bills defense was a result of a steady progression over the last month. In the Seattle and Arizona games, they looked better than they had previously. Now, in this game, in the Chargers game, the unit looked like it did a year ago. I mean, like I said, you forget those two drives that were, I don't want to say insignificant because they gave up touchdowns, but at the end of the game, the game was over. It was 34-17. It was over. And then you have the drive after they stop them on 4th down, and they're put right back at their own 5-yard line after the fumble. You take those two out, and they really didn't give up much the whole game. And so this was really, I thought, the kind of the culmination of what they've been building on the last month. And hopefully it's not an anomaly if you're a Bills fan. Hopefully that this isn't just a couple 2-week spurt where the Bills defense is peaking right now. You want it to be starting its peak and then continue the rest of the season and into the playoffs. And if this is what the potential of the Bills defense is, then you hope that they can play to that the rest of the season, because they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs if this is how well the Bills defense is playing.
I tend to agree with you in this being the culmination of the defense just progressing as a whole, because you kind of alluded to it there with your point, but the defense has really been progressing ever since the bye week. You had the Seahawks game, you had the Cardinals game, then you had the Chargers, then you had the 49ers game. You can make an argument that the defense is better top to bottom, progressing in linear progression through those 4 games. And, the biggest takeaway I had on the defensive side of the ball this week really was the interior defensive line. This was really the second time this year that I could say that the interior of the defensive line did a good job. Harrison Phillips making plays for the second straight week. Vernon Butler being a presence in this game for what felt like the first time in his Bills career. If those guys along the interior can really start to get a push, I feel like this defense really could come together, because you were talking about in the early portions of the season, that really being their bugaboo, that being their Achilles heel on that side of the ball, not having their big one technique defensive tackle and the inability to get pressure the standard way that they do with the bend don't break type defense that they've had for the last 2 seasons. But now you see them starting to run more exotic looks. You see them sending more pressures, more 5-man pressures, having Tremaine Edmonds stand up at the edge. AJ Klein being a presence in the pass rush. He wasn't this week, but he has been in weeks past. And Matt Milano looked good in small sample size. He had 35% of the snaps, but he did make a few athletic plays where I see him make those plays, and it's just that he's a different player from AJ Klein. We all know that. And the point is that this defense gets incomparably better when Matt Milano is on the field. And if he's on the field for a majority of this game against the Steelers, I think this Bills defense is only going to improve as they have these last 4 games.
Yeah, and the 49ers game was kind of the perfect situation to ease Matt Milano back in. I know you and I said last week that we didn't want him on the field unless he could go 100% and take on 100% of the role that he usually would. But, the guys around him played so well this week that he was able to play what you said, 35% of snaps, and just be able to kind of ease back in and get back used to the game feel because they're going to need him 100% of the time against Pittsburgh this week. And I thought that the linebackers did things really well. Tremaine Edmonds had a tremendous game. I mean, the 4th down stop on the goal line comes to mind. First of all, he made a couple really good plays. And like I said, just an all-out encouraging effort by this unit. I mean, other than some blown coverages, which we'll talk about, I think that this was their most complete performance of the season.
Yeah, and let's talk about those blown coverages. Really, I felt like one person in particular didn't have a good game. And I feel like every time we play a team with 2 above-average wide receivers, we're having the same conversation again. Levi Wallace was subpar in this performance, to say the least. You're talking about a player who, he let up the pass interference early in the first quarter. That was a soft call. It was a ticky-tacky call, but still – I didn't agree with the referee's decision, but that wasn't the only mistake Levi Wallace made in this game. He was targeted 10 times, 3 times on 3rd down, and every target on 3rd down led to a 1st down or a big play, one leading to a touchdown. So Wallace, his struggle really continues, and I'm curious to know what you think, whether or not this could potentially lead to Dane Jackson getting more run at the cornerback 2 slot this late in the season. I'm not really sure if that's the direction this defense is going to take, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing studs and duds, Levi Wallace is the obvious dud from this game for the Bills. The long completion to Ayuk was the most noticeable one, but he got beat on more than one occasion. He got beat several times. And yeah, it makes you wonder if the Bills should start sharing some of the snaps that Wallace is getting. And I think that Dane Jackson is the guy who comes to mind as maybe putting him in here. I mean, it's a tough position to put a guy in who's only played 1 or 2 NFL games, but maybe it could work. And I think that at least giving these guys even snaps instead of kind of giving Levi Wallace the monopoly on these snaps would be beneficial to your defense. We've said in weeks past, rotate these guys in, try them all out, and I don't think that giving Levi Wallace however many percentage of snaps is really beneficial to your football team when there's other guys who can play as efficiently and sufficiently as Wallace does.
Well, he was in coverage. He was targeted 10 times. He allowed 8 completions, and the 2 plays that didn't find the receiver's hands was the pass interference, and the other one was an overthrow by Mullins where Ayuk was wide open for a slant. And if he caught that ball, I'm not going to say he was going to score touchdowns. The safeties were in position to make a play. It would have at least been a 1st down. A majority of the completions he allowed were 1st downs. Now, I'm not sure if this is really the time of year to start tinkering again, because it really felt like this defense has finally gotten their feet under them. It feels like they're starting to play with confidence. They're forcing turnovers in the second half, which has really been a result of the Bills' success in these games. When you're looking at how this defense is making plays and when they're making plays and how they're making plays, I don't know necessarily if throwing in or changing up cornerback 2 is the answer right now. Do I want to see Dane Jackson get more snaps? Absolutely. I think he deserves more snaps at this point in time. But going up against the Steelers, where they have a 4-headed monster at wide receiver with Claypool, Juju, Washington, and then his name's Johnson. I'm not sure if Dane Jackson is really the answer in this game. I'm not sure if the Bills really do have a solidified answer for the cornerback 2 position and on the team right now. You have Josh Norman, you have Dane Jackson, you have Levi Wallace, but it doesn't seem like there's any sort of rotation going on like we saw last season with Kevin Johnson and Levi Wallace. And I feel like that would be the answer for this team. There should be some sort of rotation. You see how this team manages their defensive line rotation with their defensive tackles, keeping fresh legs on the field so that, you get maximum production out of your usage of the defensive linemen. I don't see why it wouldn't be advantageous to try and do the same thing with your cornerback 2 role, where, that's going to be the position on the field that's most times targeted, considering you have Trey White on the other side of the field. So quarterbacks are just naturally going to be looking at the other wide receiver that's covered up with whoever it may be. So maybe that could be the direction they choose to go, where they start rotating these corners in, maybe splitting snaps between the 3 of them, or maybe it's 2 of them. I'm not sure, but I don't think there's any one definitive player that should be playing cornerback 2 right now. I don't think any of them have earned it, quite frankly. Do I think Dane Jackson deserves an opportunity? Absolutely. He has done nothing but taken the opportunities he's had and ran with them. Do I think Josh Norman deserves more of an opportunity than he has? I do believe that. He's a veteran in this league, but this coaching staff arguably knows him better than any other coaching staff in the league. And if they're not putting him out there, they're not putting him out there for a reason. And I'm confident in saying that. And I hate to say that Levi Wallace is the best option that you have by default almost, but it kind of seems like it is. But I prefer if they were to rotate the 3 players. If Josh Norman isn't a starting caliber player in this league anymore, then by all means, do not force him on the field. That's not what I'm saying. But they do have something with Dane Jackson. I would like to see him get more opportunities going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. CB2 by committee is a term that I've used to refer to this situation. And I will continue to refer to it as that because I think that's what it should be, and that is the best option if you're the Bills, is giving other guys snaps, diversifying the snaps. I mean, Wallace is the easiest. I don't know. I don't know what the term. I was going to say scapegoat, but that's not the right word to say, because with Jackson you have the issue of the number of players on the roster. They can't call him up from the practice squad again without having to keep him on the roster, if I'm correct, and so. That presents a conundrum. And then if Josh Norman isn't playing, we assume there's something wrong because he's a veteran, whereas Wallace is a younger, unproven guy. And so he is, kind of your default guy. But I think that giving all 3 of them snaps would be beneficial for the Bills.
Yeah, and not only was it a good performance for the Bills defense, but it also was for the offense. And you can't even really say this was a career day for Josh Allen. It was a really good day. It was one of his best days as a professional quarterback. I mean, you could say it was a career day considering he threw 4 touchdowns, over 375 yards, and over 80% completion percentage. That's all those stats are remarkable for Josh Allen, considering where the uncertainty as to what he was going to be this season leading up to this year. But you look at how the Bills offense attacked the 49ers. I thought not only was this one of Josh Allen's best games as a pro, I thought it was also one of Brian Daboll's best games as an offensive coordinator, not just in professional, but probably in his entire career. And leading up to this game, I sat right here on this podcast, and I said that this game was going to be the showcase game for Josh Allen, this offense, Brian Daboll, everybody. This was the game that Brian Daboll, he had circled with red highlighter that he was going to have this. He was going to have this offense humming, and that he did. You saw the running game mixing with the passing game with synergy. You saw them playing off of one another. You saw him calling plays earlier in the game to set up plays later in the game. You saw things in my eyes that I really haven't seen from a Brian Daboll offense before. I thought he called his best game as a coordinator. I'd give him an A+ for this offensive performance. Him and Josh Allen both. I thought the offensive coordinator did his job. Absolutely. I thought Josh Allen, he did his thing. He looked like a star in prime time on Monday Night Football. Overall, I thought this was one of the best, most complete performances for the Bills offense all season.
Yeah, I think that this was one of the best games we've seen from the Bills offense, and for 3 main reasons. The first is that Josh Allen threw the ball well and made good decisions. I thought that he took care of the ball pretty well, generally speaking, and didn't try to force plays that weren't there. The second reason is that Brian Daboll called a great game. He really turned his offense loose. When Allen doesn't have to force plays, and when he can try to make throws, when he doesn't have to try to make throws that he shouldn't, I should say, a large part of that is because of the game plan of Brian Daboll. I thought he was great in this one. And the third is that the offensive line did a great job of protecting Allen. He had plenty of time to throw the ball all night, which allowed them to open up the playbook even more. And those three things working together really produced this tremendous night of 375 yards and 4 touchdowns for Allen, a career day for Cole Beasley, his career high receiving yards. Stephon Diggs had his catches like he always does, and this was really just a great overall offensive performance. And they did the little things as well the obvious things. And little things I'm talking about: Stephon Diggs block on the Dawson Knox touchdown, going low, cutting the defender, and I mean that's just great stuff. That's exactly what you want to see from your star wide receiver, and that really impressed me. And the offense as a whole really impressed me. And I mean, peaking at the right time is an interesting thing to say about this squad, but that could be it if they continue to play like this over the next month.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on it there on the Dawson Knox touchdown. Consecutive games for him scoring a touchdown. And really, it kind of opens the door to a conversation that we haven't really had, because Dawson Knox has given us zero reason to have this conversation. But if the Bills can have prevalent production from their tight end position in this offense, combined with the 4 wide receivers when they're all healthy, or just right now with just Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley, if they can have a reliable target in their tight end room like Dawson Knox with the athleticism that Dawson Knox has, you're going to unlock doors of efficiency that you have yet to see of Josh Allen, and that's a scary thought. And it is not a coincidence that it coincides with a performance in which he completed over 80% of his passes, where Dawson Knox has 4 receptions. I understand one was on a swing, or excuse me, it was on a shovel pass. That's what it was on. It was on a shovel pass. So you could say what you will, but the point is they're getting Dawson Knox involved, and you can't say he's not starting to build trust with his quarterback again, because I can kind of understand how Josh Allen may or may not have lost confidence in Dawson Knox and wouldn't look to him as often given his reputation with the football. He's not a reliable target. You don't know whether he's going to catch it or not. If you throw the ball to Dawson Knox 100 times, how many times do you expect him to catch it? That's really the kind of the conversation that Josh Allen has to have with himself when picking targets and who's open and who to throw it to. But you touched on how this offensive line performed, and I thought that this Bills offensive line, I thought that their athleticism matched up perfectly with the strength of the 49ers. You know, I talked about this big defensive line that they were facing and possible potential concerns facing up against 4 big defensive linemen. But you saw what the Bills did offensively, and this is partially why I said it was one of Brian Daboll's best called games in his career. No, he wasn't rolling. Maybe this isn't as much credit or Brian Daboll as it is Josh Allen. Josh Allen was moving the pocket. He forced the pocket to move. When you have 4 big, I wouldn't call any professional athlete unathletic, but not as athletic as premier edge rushers. When you have 4 big defensive linemen rather than having that fast finesse edge rusher on to contain a quarterback, when you don't have that on your team, and they tried to implement it with Deion Jordan later in the game, you saw him get a sack. But earlier in the game, in the first half, when Josh Allen's manually moving the pocket himself, he's moving the pocket. He had all the time he could ever ask for back there to throw, rolling right and doing the things he does with the football in his hand. I thought that this stacked up perfectly for the Bills, and the 49ers are simply outmatched. They are outmatched with the personnel, and they were out-coached in this game as well. I thought the Bills from top to bottom, Josh Allen, Brian Daboll, Leslie Frazier, Sean McDermott, they all did an excellent job on Monday Night Football against the 49ers, and they did what they needed to do in this game, and they won convincingly. They won this game the way that I thought they needed to win this game in order to not necessarily prove themselves, but entrench themselves as a top contender in the AFC, because, you know, who knows the kind of things people would throw back and forth if this were a close game and the Bills are playing a backup quarterback. You don't know what kind of rabbit holes we're going to go down in those conversations, but it's nice to see them win this game in convincing fashion, in I wouldn't say a blowout fashion, but without that last second garbage time touchdown, 34-17, that's not really a competitive game. And the Bills did what they needed to do. They looked very good in this game. And, hey, this is the kind of football you want to see this team playing in December.
Yeah, for sure. And it sets up this Sunday night game very well. And I do want to talk about the Steelers game because I'm really conflicted about it. I am. I mean, the Bills are coming into this game with back-to-back wins in games that they won in different ways. The Chargers game was an ugly win, while the 49ers game was a sexy win. but they won both, and the Bills are riding high right now. Then you have Pittsburgh, which is coming into Buffalo after surprisingly falling to Washington this week. We can all agree we didn't see that coming. We thought if what's the team that's going to break the Steelers' undefeated streak here to start the season, we didn't think it was going to be Washington. After watching them lose to Washington, it's hard to get a read on the Steelers team right now. I mean, who are they? How will they respond after that loss? The matchup that I'm looking forward to the most is the Buffalo offense versus the Pittsburgh defense. I mean, two premier units right there, two units that have played well for the majority of the season. The Pittsburgh defense being the most consistent and the best defensive unit in the league. I mean, looking at some of their rankings here, they're ranked first in the NFL in points allowed. The Steelers defense is third in yards allowed, second in passing yards, and sixth in rushing yards. There's not any weaknesses in the Pittsburgh defense. And it's going to present an interesting challenge to Josh Allen, Brian Daboll, and the Bills offense this week.
I understand statistically not seeing any weaknesses, but this team has really, the last couple of weeks, been ravaged by COVID, ravaged by injuries. I mean, you talk about the players that are hurt on this football team right now. Joe Hayden's not going to be able to suit up for the Steelers this weekend. They're down to pretty much one linebacker with Avery Williamson, who they traded for from the New York Jets. They are run thin at linebacker right now. Bud Dupree is out. Vince Williams is out. Robert Spillane, who was in relief for Devin Bush, who was already out. He tore his ACL earlier in the season. I hope he has a speedy recovery. But the point being, this team has drawn thin along the interior. You're talking about a team with really, it's a 3-4 defense that really only has one inside linebacker. And TJ Watt and this defensive line, that's really where I see the strength of this team. You're talking about a team that has led the league in sacks, what looks like is going to be 4 years in a row. And you talk about that this is probably the best 3-4 defensive line in football, with Casey Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, Tyson Alualu, who really had an awesome comeback story. A former first-round bust has really found a resurgence to his career with the Steelers. And then obviously TJ Watt, who is a man possessed off the edge. I'm really intrigued to see what the Bills can do against a big defensive line like this, especially considering how thin they are at middle linebacker and what they choose to really kind of attack this defense.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest keys for offense for the Bills is the play of its offensive line. I mean, the Bills' offensive line is crucial this week. The line gave Allen multiple time against the 49ers, and we saw the result. It's going to be no easy task this week, but if the offensive line can give Josh Allen a boost, that's where the Bills can really beat the Steelers' defense. Because like you said, they're thinner than they have been at other parts of the season at the other positions. They have injuries. The Bills are very healthy right now, but it all starts at the line of scrimmage. And if the Bills offensive line can't protect Josh Allen, then they're not going to be able to get any further than that. Josh Allen's not going to be able to throw the ball downfield like he liked to. And you're also not going to be able to open up the playbook as much as you'd like. That I think was so crucial in the 49ers game. Everything was clicking so well for the Bills offense early in the game that Brian Daboll could call whatever the hell plays he wanted that entire game because everything was going that good. If that doesn't happen, if you don't give Josh Allen that protection early in this game against the Steelers, and then you maybe get down on the scoreboard, then you start to be limited a bit in what you can do, and you become more predictable. I thought that the Bills complemented the rushing game with their passing game well in the 49ers offense. That's about where I think we want the Bills running offense to be. Obviously, the Bills are a pass-first offense. They should be because that's what they're good at. I'm not going to come into these games saying that the Bills need to establish a great run game because they don't. Throw the ball down the field like you do the whole season. You're third in the NFL in passing yards per game, the Bills are. Continue to do that. But you may not be able to do so if you're not allowing your quarterback time to drop back and your receivers to run down the field to have Allen throw it to him. I really think the offensive line is so important, and they know that. Trust me, that Mitch Morse-led group, they know that coming into this week. They know that they have a big responsibility on their shoulders, and it's going to be interesting to see how they play.
And it's something we can't forget to mention is last week we saw the combination of Deion Dawkins at left guard, you saw Ike Bacher. Center, you saw Mitch Morse. Right guard, you saw John Feliciano. And then Darrell Williams at right tackle. And that is by far their best combination that we have seen all season. And you could credit that to the lack of athleticism of the 49ers defensive line. Maybe it was just a bad pass rush unit that you were facing last week. I'm not of the belief of that. I think Ike Bacher is a diamond in the rough that you've seen. And I was critical of him when he first went in there. I went as far as to call him Ike Butker. And that's not a mispronunciation of his name. It's a deliberate mispronunciation of his name. And, but Ike Bacher, you really think about it, no offensive lineman in his first NFL start or his first handful of starts is ever going to go out there and just play out of his mind and have a clean game or not get penalized or just go out there and it's a seamless transition. That's never going to happen on an offensive line. So don't hold your breath to wait for it to happen. Playing offensive line in the NFL is an extremely difficult job to do. It's a position that requires synergy amongst all 5 players. It requires chemistry amongst all 5 players. And if one person is not on the same page with the other 4, then the whole thing gets thrown off track. And that could derail your offense. It could derail a facet of your offense. It could derail passing your pass protection or your run blocking or what have you. The offensive line really dictates a lot in a lot of football games. And I agree with you, Jeff, that it's going to dictate a lot in this game, whether the Bills can maintain or handle the pressure of the Pittsburgh Steelers, whether they can handle those 3 big defensive linemen. People don't want to hear this. They really don't want to hear this. And I think this is the first nice thing I ever said about this player. But I think you're going to see Lee Smith activated this week. You're going to see a lot of those sets that you saw last week because Lee Smith had a lot to do with the success of the protection for the Bills against the 49ers. You saw them having him sit back in shotgun with Allen and being the 6th protector or being the 7th protector. I think that's really smart. I mean, is it one player down? Yeah, it is. But you have a very quality blocker back there protecting your quarterback, giving him time. And when he's facing a secondary like he is this week, I understand the stats do kind of tell a different story. But when he's facing a secondary like he is this week, who are you scared of that's not Minkah Fitzpatrick? Who? They don't have Joe Hayden. No one in the secondary really scares me. Terrell Edmonds doesn't scare me. He's slow. His brother's faster than him. He plays in a different level of defense. But really, the only player that I'm concerned of on the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary is Minkah Fitzpatrick because this guy's a star. Once they got Minkah Fitzpatrick on this football team last year, it changed the complexion of their defense. It changed everything they can do because he is a guy he's a rangy safety. He can play sideline to sideline. He's a crazy athlete, and he's a very smart football player in his right. So I think that's really the matchup that I want to see in the passing attack is seeing what Josh Allen can do, maybe not to confuse or deceive Minkah Fitzpatrick, but maybe avoid him. Is Josh Allen scared to pull the trigger? No, he's not. He's not scared to pull the trigger. Do I think he's going to throw it at Minkah Fitzpatrick and try and find his favorite wide receiver? Yeah, I do. And I'm really excited to see what they can do because I don't see a corner on this team that can hang with Stephon Diggs. Steve Nelson isn't doing it. Mike Hilton did a good job against the Washington Redskins covering guys like Terry McLaurin, and I don't know their second wide receiver. So how much credit can you give that? I'm not sure, but I'm really excited to see what Stephon Diggs can do against the secondary. I don't think there's anybody that can really cover him, and I'm really interested to see how they get Cole Beasley involved because that's something that can't be lost in that 49ers game. Cole Beasley was keeping those chains moving. I said it on the Saturday night tailgate that I thought that this guy was going to get a lot of targets, and I believe he had 11 targets, but he's setting career numbers. And you're seeing a quarterback and a wide receiver who aren't only on the same page. They're in the same paragraph. These guys have such good chemistry that you're seeing it translate on the game day. I don't think this week is going to be any different. I think you're going to see both Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley be heavily involved, be heavily used. You're going to see both of them be successful against the Steelers secondary, in my opinion.
And Clayton, I want to hear your thoughts on how you think the Steelers defense is going to attack the Bills. What will be their plan to limit Josh Allen? Or, are they going to try to completely take away any rushing attack the Bills could have and then make Allen beat them? Are they going to try to take away the Bills' threats at wide receivers? I mean, the Bills' offense can beat you a few different ways. So how do you think the Steelers are going to try to limit them.
Well, you look at the press conferences they have, their defensive coordinator touched on how good of a runner Josh Allen is. And every time we hear about it, you always see in that preceding week, you see them force Josh Allen to stay in the pocket. But the good thing is Josh Allen, as he's progressed, as he's gotten better, you see him become more and more comfortable in the pocket. And I don't know if that's necessarily going to work against Josh Allen this week. I don't. But the thing is like you said earlier, Jeff, the biggest thing is being able to maintain your ground and hold the pocket together along the interior. Because if you have Casey Hayward pushing that pocket, there's not going to be a pocket for Josh Allen to step up into when TJ Watt's flying off the edge. There's not. I'll go as far as to say that this is a much more different matchup now that they don't have Bud Dupree, who he's not on the level of TJ Watt, but he is definitely a serviceable edge rusher in the NFL. Without Bud Dupree, this defense doesn't scare me nearly as much as it did a few weeks ago. You can compare it. I said leading up to the Chargers game that I was terrified of Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa having to play both of them because that could provide some very difficult matchups for this Bills offensive line. And ultimately what you saw happen was Joey Bosa was the only was the only one of the two that was active. He did have a good game. He had 3 sacks, but ultimately you saw the Bills won the game. And I don't think protection wasn't really a consistent issue for the Bills offensive line. But in the Steelers game, I think that it'd be advantageous to have a much more balanced approach. Run the ball at these linebackers. They don't have a lot. I think that if you could have your run game apparent, not being one-dimensional on that side of the ball, and make them know that your rushing attack is going to be a threat during this game, and sprinkling in the run when necessary. And I thought that's what the Bills offense did very well last week. I felt like the rhythm of the game is really where they found success in their timing of the play calls. And I think if Brian Daboll can string together 2 consecutive weeks where he finds rhythm in his play calls, where he gets in a groove, I think that this could be this Bills offense could surprise a lot of people with the amount of points that they could potentially put up on this Steelers defense. I definitely expect them to send a lot of pressure at Allen. I expect them to keep him in the pocket, force him to try and be a quarterback. I don't even necessarily know if they'd send a lot of pressure, because when you're sending pressure, you're not dropping as many guys back, but it's all dependent on if they can get home or not. And, Jeff, you said it, I wouldn't say at the onset, but I've reiterated your sentiment multiple times now. The biggest key is if that offensive line can hold up against this defensive line. You have 3 big bodies, then you have TJ Watt. How are you going to block them? If they send extra guys, how are you going to block them? That's what I want to see. I want to see Brian Daboll scheme something for this offensive line. I want to see Bobby Johnson have these guys ready, and I want to see the offensive line continue or add to a very successful performance that they had last week against the 49ers. That is the biggest key for this Bills offense, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the Steelers might not need to send pressure if they're getting pressure on the quarterback with 3 or 4 guys, and obviously you don't need to blitz, and their defensive linemen are that good. But I want to see the Bills stick to their strengths in this one. I want to see Allen and Daboll attack them with everything they have, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're not going to beat the Steelers defense by playing afraid. So don't be afraid of mistakes. Open up the playbook, and if the offensive line can hold up, the Bills definitely can play with this Steelers defense. The Bills can play with any defense in the NFL, because I think that at full strength, this Pittsburgh one is the best one that's out there, and I think that the Bills have the players and they have the capability to play with them.
All right, and since we've really talked about the matchup that the Bills are going to be facing with the Pittsburgh Steelers on with their offense facing their defense, I'm interested to see what the Steelers offense looks like facing the Bills defense, because, my main gripe about the Bills offense all season, my main gripe about Brian Daboll all year, and that's why I gave him credit this week, because you saw an offense that I'd love to see every single week, because that offensive game plan was perfect. Honestly, I thought he called a perfect game last week. And the reason why I was criticizing Brian Daboll, the reason I was criticizing the Bills offense, was that they weren't establishing the rushing attack. I'm not saying hand the ball off 30 times a game and be a run-heavy football team. What I was saying is don't be one-dimensional, because if you're one-dimensional, then it becomes much more easy to stop you on that side of the ball. And that's what I didn't want to see. And being one-dimensional is exactly what this Steelers offense is. They are one-dimensional. They are not good at running the ball. Ever since Le'Veon Bell left this team, they have been bottom 3 in the league for 3 consecutive years in rushing the football. It's not necessarily their offensive line falling off. They won't have Marquise Pouncey. And, their interior has been changing for the last couple of years. They still have Alejandro Villanueva. I said that right. So, obviously, the strength of this team is their passing attack with their 4 wide receivers, with Chase Claypool, with Juju Smith-Schuster, with James Washington, and with Deontay Johnson. But the Bills defense, their Achilles heel this year, without a doubt, has been the rushing attack, and it has been teams running the ball to set up the pass against this defense. And I'm not necessarily worried about that this week. They do have James Conner returning from the COVID list, and James Conner is a special back in my opinion. I've always liked James Conner. I've enjoyed watching his tape. I've enjoyed his game. I think he is a very talented player. But the Bills, the Steelers, they're not a run-heavy football team, and they do have 4 monsters at wide receiver. So I personally think that this is really going to be the rock fight in this game. Is going to be the Bills defense facing the Steelers. Going to be the Bills defense facing the Steelers offense, seeing what these 4 wide receivers can do against these talented safeties and this talented secondary. I'm really intrigued to see what Big Ben can do against the Bills defense. And if he can really kind of keep up with I wouldn't say the pace that he's established, but kind of see how his arm's wearing off as they continuously throw the ball 40 times or more every single game. And that's going to take a toll on an older quarterback. Big Ben, he's a big, strong quarterback, but he's a little too old for that ish, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, the Steelers' run game is very lacking. Colin Cowherd talked about this on his show today. The fact that the Steelers use Ben Roethlisberger more than any other team uses its quarterback. The highest attempted passes, Ben Roethlisberger is number 1 by a lot. And when Cowherd was talking about this, he brought up the fact that no team has ever won the Super Bowl when that team's quarterback leads the league in pass attempts. That's amazing to me. That blows my mind. Think of how many great offenses that there have been that have been reliant on great big arm quarterbacks that throw the ball down the field. I mean, the Bills this year comes to mind. I think they said Josh Allen is ranked maybe 10th or so in pass attempts this season. But the Steelers really rely on their passing game a lot. And according to those statistics, I know you can make numbers say whatever you want, but according to those statistics, that's not a recipe to win championships. And the Steelers' passing game really poses threats to everybody. But if they're one-dimensional, then I'd like to see a Leslie Frazier game plan that can attack that. And I think that a big key for the Bills' defense is to take away Pittsburgh's big play threats because they have a lot of them. Take away their receivers. And that's going to take more than Trey White if you're going to do so. Chase Claypool presents a problem to the Buffalo defense if Trey White is taking the majority snaps against Juju Smith-Schuster, or the other way around if Trey is taking the majority of snaps against Claypool or Deontay Johnson, whoever he's matched up against. They have a lot of big play receivers. And a defensive back opposite of Trey is going to have to step up in this game for the Bills if they're going to limit Pittsburgh's offensive output. It's also worth noting the Steelers are getting center Marquise Pouncey back for this game, which could help their running attack. I mean, maybe they'll look at getting Pouncey back as an opportunity to start running the ball more and beat up the Bills like that. But all of these big play threats, you're really going to need that CB2, which we want the Bills to play by committee. You're going to need them to step up. And one more player to watch in this game, Eric Ebron. I know that he's not a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle type tight end, but he's a good player that the Steelers involve in their offense every week. And Ebron has 49 receptions this year. That's 2 more than Chase Claypool has. So I'd look for Matt Milano to keep a close eye on Ebron in this game, and don't fall asleep on the fact that he can be a factor. The Steelers have a lot of ways they can beat you in the passing attack. And although their rushing game is limited, I think that the success for the Bills defense is going to lie in taking away some of the big play threats for the Steelers.
I'm no doctor. I'm no injury analyst. I can't tell you exactly how comfortable Matt Milano was last week playing 35% of the snaps against the 49ers. But I will say this. is having him on a pitch count was not only to try and protect his health and kind of evaluate where he's at in terms of in game shape and what he can do when he's plugged into the game, but I also believe it was partially not only just to kind of see where he was at, but it was kind of keep him fresh for this game. Because if you look at the Bills' remaining schedule, aside from Noah Fant, this is the best tight end they will face the rest of the season. And Matt Milano has really made his hay as being the tight end eraser. Whenever he's matched up against these top-tier, top-level tight ends or against good tight ends, they're kind of non-factors in these games. And I'm kind of excited to see if that's going to be the case this week, or if Matt Milano is not 100%. And by all means, I don't want to see them force Matt Milano out there to stop Eric Ebron. I don't think Eric Ebron is that much of a problem that you're going to have to force Matt Milano out there again, or force Matt Milano out there in an uncomfortable situation. But I do believe that these four, you're entirely right, Jeff. These four wide receivers do pose a huge threat to the Bills defense. And, what better time to have all of your defensive backs back? And we talked about it earlier in the show about the potential rotation of cornerback 2 and what they can do with that position and who could possibly play there. I think all those guys get snaps this week. I don't think necessarily in just 3 cornerback sets, but I think the player I want to see the most this week step up of anybody, it's got to be Taron Johnson. Because Taron Johnson, I think he's probably going to be matched up with Juju Smith-Schuster in the slot. And Juju Smith-Schuster, I hate on my opinions if you want, but I think Juju Smith-Schuster is the most overrated wide receiver in the NFL by a landslide. I don't think there's a single player, not only on the Steelers roster, but in the entire league that has been hyped up more than Juju Smith-Schuster, who has all of one above average season to his resume. And you can say what you will about injuries and what have you. And, that's unfortunate. But Juju Smith-Schuster hasn't found a way to produce since that first season that he sprung onto the field. And now you see 3 other wide receivers added to this team with Deontay Johnson, James Washington, and Chase Claypool. And they're all tearing up. They're all eating. And it's taking away from touches from Juju. And say what you will about that. But it's going to pose a huge threat in the slot with Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson, who they work both of them in the slot. So I'm really nervous to see what the Bills could possibly try and do to combat their attack along the middle of the field with their passing attack. Taron Johnson, he hasn't been a noticeable liability like, the way he was in the beginning of the season, similar to AJ Klein. But this is a game that he has to show up. It doesn't matter if you're covering Deontay Johnson or Juju Smith-Schuster. It doesn't matter who's in the slot. If you're covering one of these, I wouldn't call them prolific, but good wide receivers, it's going to be a matchup. Because Big Ben, he's a smart quarterback. He's played in the league for a long time, 17 years. He's a veteran quarterback. There's not a defense he hasn't seen. There's not a coverage schematic or bracket that he hasn't seen. So that is what I'm interested to see. I want to see the chess game of the defensive backs of this defense. Like you said, Jeff, the Leslie Frazier defense, see what they can do to not maybe confuse Big Ben, but potentially confuse these wide receivers and see what you can do to try and take your matchups and potentially find mismatches at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that one way the Bills can kind of alleviate the burden that's put on their secondary this week is by getting pressure on the quarterback. If you can pressure Roethlisberger, not allow him to have time to make decisions like he'd like to, then you're making things a little easier on your secondary. And I think that there's been a correlation between the play of the Bills' defensive line and the play of their secondary all season. As the defensive line has steadily gotten better here the last month or so, like we've talked about, as they found way to put pressure on the quarterback by blitzing backers and by blitzing other players instead of just relying on a 4-man rush, because as we saw, they weren't able to get pressure on the quarterback. But as the defensive line play has improved and the Bills have found some solutions on how to, rush opposing quarterbacks a little better, then you start to see the secondary play better. You start to see them get more interceptions, more turnovers, and I think that pressuring the quarterback this week is going to be, it can go a long way as far as slowing down some of those Pittsburgh receivers instead of just relying on coverages and just an outstanding game from your secondary players on their own, because they do need help. That's the nature of how it goes in the NFL.
Yeah, and having Marquise Pouncey doesn't really help the Bills' defensive line in that aspect. But that front four hasn't been getting pressure just by themselves all season. So if you're going to create pressure, you're going to have to manufacture pressure. You're going to have to send extra guys, and sending extra guys and taking them out of coverage. I'm not sure if that's advantageous. I'm not sure if that's the best plan. But if they do send 5 guys, if they are blitzing extra guys and they're blitzing extra bodies and they're trying to get home to Big Ben, they got to do it fast. They have to scheme guys open in this defensive line. You have to scheme guys unblocked. That's what you have to do if you want to get to Big Ben. Because like I said, he's a veteran in this league. He's going to get the ball out of his hands. He's going to find someone open as fast as he can. Is he going to? Yeah, he holds on the ball, deep developing routes downfield, get going. But you want to get to Big Ben as quick as possible. Similar to look at what happens when the Bills have to play Ryan Fitzpatrick. We always say you have to pressure Fitzpatrick. You have to force him into mistakes, but it's so hard to do that because he gets the ball out of his hands so quickly because he makes the decision, boom, just like that, and he gets it out and he finds his man, or sometimes he doesn't. But the point is Big Ben. If the Bills try and blitz him, if the Bills try and bring extra pressure, they're going to try and get the ball out quickly. And there's so many things that the Steelers offense can do to attack you in the passing game that it is kind of concerning. And I think Marquise Pouncey coming back this week could play a role in the running game, potentially finding their footing, no pun intended. But I'm really intrigued to see what Leslie Frazier dials up to stop this Pittsburgh offense, because I wouldn't say they've been unstoppable, but they have shot themselves in the foot on numerous occasions. And I think it's very important to point out that they are not a second-half football team. That you saw a game last week where I forget the Redskins record. The Washington football team's record. But you saw a football team that is nowhere near as quality of a team that was 11-0 at that current point in time, which, by the way, I think they're the worst 11-0 team ever in the history of this league. You look at the schedule that they've had to play. That is, my goodness. They were handed a cakewalk this year. They really were. And maybe it was more so by happenstance because I don't think they really planned on Bill O'Brien. But that's neither here or there. But the point is the Steelers. I've always thought they were overrated. I thought they were overrated the whole season. I really have. I've been looking forward to this game for a really long time because not only is it on Sunday Night Football, but because the Steelers were on 11-0 winning streak, and then they dropped one to the Washington football team, and now the Bills get to play them on Sunday Night Football, and people were kind of worried, well, they lost their game and now they're going to come in fired up. These are professional athletes. They're going to come in fired up regardless as to what the outcome was last week. So I'm excited for this game. I really am. I think that this is an incredible matchup. I think it's going to be a tight game. I don't think you're going to see a very decisive win. And if you do, I'm not sure. I will say this. If a team wins by more than one possession, it will be the Bills. And I'm predicting them to win by more than one possession, but just barely. Just barely. Jeff, what is your prediction for this game?
So like I said, I was conflicted about this game because, I mean, it makes sense to pick the Bills in this game. It does, and because they're playing so well right now. They've had 2 back-to-back wins, and I think the Bills have shown us that they can win games in a variety of different ways, whether it's leaning on Josh Allen to throw for 400 yards or if it's for your defense to get key takeaways in the second half. And the Steelers, they've kind of had a couple hiccups lately. We talked about the injuries. And we saw that they lost to Washington last week in a game that really left a lot of people scratching their heads and maybe kind of exposed some of the ways or kind of exposed some of the weaknesses that Pittsburgh has. But, they're a good team. They're a really good team. I think that the Bills are going to get their offensive shots in this game. The Bills offense is going to score its points as it always does. I don't think that there's a defense out there that can stop the Buffalo offense right now. But I think that there are some mismatches that the Steelers have on offense in the Bills secondary to where they're going to put up some points as well. I think we could very well see this turn into a shootout. And if it does, give the Bills advantage in a shootout, because I just think that they're more well equipped to go and keep scoring those points and strike quickly as opposed to a team with a less athletic quarterback. I went back and forth a lot, but I am going to pick the Steelers 27-24. That's going to be very unpopular, but the pessimistic Bills fan in me says this Monday night victory was too good to be true. They need to be reeled in a little bit here more and get us asking questions before the last 3 games of the season. And also to make it interesting, the Bills are going to do to Bills fans. They're not going to run away with the division. They're going to make it come down to the Miami game. I think that that's the inevitable thing that's going to happen. So we'll see.
Oh man. Joshua Torres, he was not. Don't say it. You knew what you were gonna say. You just said, "Don't say it." That's all he had to say. That's just funny. It's in Orchard Park on Sunday. I'm no meteorologist, but right now it says it's supposed to be 43 with 40% chance of rain. So it could be sloppy. It might not be. I don't really. There's been times where I've seen 80% chance of rain on my phone, and it's there's not a cloud in the sky. So take that with a very large grain of salt as to whether or not this will be a sloppy Sunday night game. But I don't know. I think these two teams, they match up so well. They really do.
They do.
This really is Sunday night
strength
football.
On strength all the way around, I think.
Am I going to sit here and say that this is a potential AFC championship preview? No, I'm not going to say that. I think the Bills can make it to the AFC championship. I don't think the Steelers can make it to the AFC championship. But I think the Steelers being one-dimensional is going to hurt them in this game. I think that the Bills' defense is not going to necessarily confuse Ben Roethlisberger, but they're going to put him in uncomfortable positions. They're going to force pressure on Roethlisberger. They're going to manufacture pressure. They're going to have a lot of defensive backs on the field. I think that's how they're going to do it. They're going to have a lot of exotic looks. And like you said, Jeff, I think the Bills do have a good amount of mismatches on their offensive side of the ball. But I agree that the Steelers do as well against this Bills secondary in some spots. But I think having Josh Allen, having I wouldn't say prolific, obviously, because Ben Roethlisberger's won 2 Super Bowls, but you will say a more athletic quarterback, like you said. I think that is really the advantage for the Bills. The ability to move Allen out of the pocket, the ability to completely shift protection and change everything. And the fact that I don't think there's a corner on this team that can cover Stephon Diggs. I just don't. And if there is a guy that can cover Stephon Diggs, we'll find another one to cover Cole Beasley and let me know what's going to happen. Because I just don't, I don't see it happening. I don't. And I was asked today at work what my prediction is going to be, because the prediction I gave last week was kind of close. And the guy was kind of impressed. He goes, "What's the score? What's the score this week?" And I'm going to say what I told him. I'm going to say the Bills are going to win this game. And they're going to win 27-17. And is that convincing? I don't know. We'll see what fashion that this happens. Because if this is a 27-17 win where the Bills were up 27-10 and the Steelers tacked on a touchdown, that's different. That's just a little different. But I'm excited to see what happens in this game. I'm excited to see the game plan for the Bills. And this is Sunday Night Football. This is the best. This is the best production you're ever going to see as a football watcher ever. I love Sunday Night Football. Chris Collinsworth makes it it drops a little sour into it, but it kind of all blends in. The visuals are more important to me. You like him?
Yeah, I think he's fine. He doesn't make the game worse, I don't think.
He makes.
I do wish I am fine with Mike Tirico. I think Mike Tirico is one of those guys. He doesn't make the game worse. That's what I'm looking for in a broadcaster. But we are remiss if we were to not mention. I wish that Al Michaels was calling this game.
He's not.
It's Mike Tirico.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, that kind of hurts my soul a little. Al Michaels is awesome. He's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the greatest of all time.
Right. He's one of the GOAT commentators. Like that.
But anyway, yeah, Mike Tirico's fine.
Fine. Yeah, I'll take Mike. I'll take Sunday Night Football. Period. Because the presentation is more. The visuals are more important to me than anything. I can mute the TV. I can't not see it. But anyways, I got the Bills winning. Jeff doesn't. He's got to be the pessimist of the group. I mean, that's okay. It's all right.
Somebody has to be.
I've been on that side of the fence before. I've been on that. I've had the pitchforks and fire sticks coming for me. But anyways, with that, Jeff, it's been a fun episode. please tell the people where they can find you, what they had to look forward to, and what have you.
Well, you can find me on Twitter if you'd like at RealJUVEINO. St. Bonaventure men's and women's basketball coming your way this weekend. Get ready for it. Ladies had their season opener today. They have their home opener on Sunday. Men's have their home opener tomorrow. So if you're interested in college hoops, stop by for some fun this weekend. You can find me on Instagram at my name, Jeff Uvino, and appreciate anybody who comes my way as always.
And don't forget to follow the Cold Front Report on Twitter, Instagram, and like us on Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube and check out our webpage. On Twitter, it's at Cold Front Report. On Instagram, it's at Cold Front Report at Cold Front Report _ Bills News. On Facebook, it's Buffalo Bills Cold Front Report. On YouTube, it's just Cold Front Report. And then our webpage, www.coldfrontreport.com. And tonight, in just about a half hour, Jeremy Turner Montgomery will be going live with Lorenzo Alexander on Instagram, on the Cold Front Report Instagram, and I'm assuming Zoe's Instagram as well. Regardless, if you go to our Instagram account at Cold Front Report _ Bills News, you will find the live feed at around 8:30. So do not miss that.
Don't want to miss it.
I think Jeff and I do a good job in preparation and with our insight and what we can provide as analysts. But we're just unmatched when it comes to Lorenzo Alexander. The man is professional by every definition of the word. Whether it's on the field, off the field, or on the mic or on screen, you do not want to miss what Lorenzo Alexander has to say about this football game or any football game for that matter. But thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. And this has been the Overtime Podcast presented by the Cold Front Report.